Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
And hi, I'm Noble,
and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Welcome back, Noble. Good to see you again.
Glad to be here. Glad we were able to do this. We've been trying to meet for a couple days.
Yeah, yes. And for those that are wondering where Mark is, he's had some family stuff that he needs to be taken care of. So I've invited Noble on to chat about a couple of recent developments going on in the AI world. And I'm thrilled you're able to make it.
Glad to be here.
You know,
Always
so,
happy to get into some of the messy insights, messy middles of some of these new emerging technology topics that you like to talk about all so much.
and some of these can be pretty messy, can't they? You and I seem to I was
Is
about to say, you and I seem to get into some really big messes, but it occurs to me, you also get in the middle of literally charging bulls and running through mud. So you're a little bit messier than I am on stuff.
Yeah, I pay to go run obstacle course races, which involves a lot of mud for some reason, a lot of blood, sweat, and torn bicep ligaments, which is
Yeah.
why I've got this thing on.
One of the things that came up in the past couple of weeks, big new feature announced by OpenAI, are what they're referring to as function calling. That's attached to their GPT-3.5 and GPT-4 models, the latest ones of each. And I've seen a lot of people talking about them. I've seen a lot of people kind of forecasting how awesome they are, the great potential that they have, and a lot of people completely misrepresenting what they are. So I kind of figured let's talk about it. Let's talk about what they do, why they're good, but maybe also why they're not what a lot of people seem to think they are. So you want to kick off with kind of what a summary of what this new function is and what it allows for?
So yeah, I guess it just makes sense to sort of define it in the way that OpenAI represented it. So we know that with the conversational implementation or the instruction tune implementation of OpenAI's API, which is basically ChatGPT, you now have the ability to use plugins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty cool when plugins launched because you noticed that whenever you had that feature on, if you had access to the early beta, like I did, you would ask a natural language question and ChatGPT itself will choose what tool based on what you had enabled at the time. It would just intelligently choose, quote unquote, intelligently choose what tool to use. Well, that's pretty cool. And using what we talked about, Ellen, a few months back on LangChain, we can hack our way to achieving something like that using LangChain, using other methods. And so over the last couple of days, OpenAI has sort of peeled the onion and perhaps what I would presume how that magic is happening. And that magic is called functions or function calls. And how they're defining it is to have a model intelligently choose an output, choose to output a JSON object containing whatever arguments that you may have to call those functions. It's kind of confusing to wrap my head around sometimes too when I'm trying to think it through. But essentially, it's a way to connect the OpenAI API to external APIs or external capabilities that you may have, or even a SQL database
Right.
if you want it.
So the way I think that it catches me is that even though they're calling it functions, it doesn't make any API calls itself.
No,
And I think that's where a lot of people are getting tripped up right now in understanding what it can do.
you have to wire that up yourself.
Right. So literally what you need to send alongside your prompt and again, this is for developers. This is plugins are a user level thing. Functions are a developer level thing. So what we as developers send along the API call to the GPT API endpoint, along with our prompt, we're also sending something that says, we have a function with this name. Here are the parameters that it can take. Here are the types of those parameters. Here is whether the parameter is required or not. Here are all of those function definitions. Oh, and along with those function descriptions, also a description. Here's what the function does.
Right.
And if the user gives us information that may make sense to call one of these functions, tell us that.
Right.
Tell us which function and what the values for the parameters are.
And you also have the flexibility to turn functions on auto mode, which is where the natural language intelligence or the smarts comes in. Or you can say always use functions. So you're constraining the output.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Just what you want, right? Last time we spoke, we used a boring corporate example where I think if I remember correctly, but I use this example a lot where you've got Google Analytics sitting somewhere and you got that data streaming into a data lake. As an executive, every morning you want to understand how many purchases this month over last month, right? In a conversational way. I think that was an example.
That was about what our example was, yeah.
And so you would, with this capability, if I just wanted to constrain every query or intent, user's intent to output, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
If I wanted all questions that came in or queries that came in from a user to output in a constrained way, say, for example, only use the parameters that I provide you and wrap a cohesive or a sensible response around that constraint. I would say, okay, I want parameters like this, the period start, period end, which it will be, let's call that a string or an int or whatever, probably a string. I want, customer field, blah, blah, and just wrap that around what I send to OpenAI's functions to let them know that these are the constraints and parameters I want around my response. And those instructions then get run back to me as a JSON object. It's like I'm sending it instructions to wrap around the JSON, and it's just spitting that back out as a JSON string or object in itself, and then you can do something with it, as you said, for a developer standpoint.
Right. So there are a whole bunch of things involved in this. One of the things I found interesting, is that in a way they kind of tell you exactly how they implement this. So even though we are sending it next to the prompt, what they do when they get it is they format it into the prompt. It literally becomes part of the prompt in a format that the model has been specifically trained to handle. So it's not that they just, take what you send, turn it into JSON, plunk it in, and, it magically works.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a specified format that's that they've changed it to in the prompt, and their model is tuned on this.
Right.
And that's kind of amazing. So that
the new versions of 3, 5, and 4, right?
Yes. It's the most recently released models. So it's the ones that were released on the June 13th, I believe it is.
So it'll be like
GPT-3.5 turbo 0613.
Yeah. I see.
So it's those and later can handle this. And the other interesting bit to this to me, though, was that what comes back is not guaranteed to be correct JSON. it will probably be correct JSON, and it will probably be the right thing, but it's not guaranteed. And
Right.
to me, that just goes, that's a modern LLM for you.
Well, let's anchor on that for like a brief second. Is that surprising at all? I mean, you would think, okay, maybe, back in the day, if I wanted to save a little bit of money back in the day, meaning a couple of weeks ago, if I wanted to save some money, I would use the Ada model, which is
Right.
really, really cheap. And then 3.5, I haven't really played around with 3.5. I'm still playing with Ada or Babbage, depending on what I'm trying to do. You would think, oh, well, if you want to get as close to guaranteeing that the output, that the JSON blob that I get back is sound, sound as far as compliant and real JSON, I would use 4, but then that costs money, right?
Right.
It depends on what I'm trying to do. You can rack up a bill.
Sure. Well, I mean, so here's the thing, a couple of weeks ago, I would have said, no, I wouldn't necessarily expect the JSON to come back to be accurate because, I understand large language models and I understand they tend to hallucinate.
Right.
But here's a case where they're making it almost like things were a couple of years back,
Right.
where it more feels like I have an API and I expect my API to return to me valid JSON.
Right.
So,
but it's also that's also large language model generated,
right?
And so, yeah.
So I think it's an interesting crossover. It's an interesting world that we're inhabiting right now, where we want something concrete to come back, and instead we're getting something that is probably concrete. And maybe we'll touch on this another time. But it's true. 2 weeks ago, if we were doing this, if we were doing this a few weeks ago, we would be handcrafting this ourselves. We would have come up with a detailed prompt that says, something like return JSON and just JSON,
That wouldn't be guaranteed either.
And that's not guaranteed either. But we would have crafted all of this.
Yeah.
And
put a lot of your try catches and this,
right,
whatever, just to make sure you get as close to accurate
right
as possible.
And we wouldn't get a guarantee at all. Now they're at least giving you, it's a good chance that it'll be correct. Because they've done the work to tune the model to work that way.
I got a question for you on that.
Yeah.
Have you played around with plugins, the plugins feature at all?
I have not played with the plugins. And the big reason I haven't.
Okay, please tell me.
The big reason I haven't, and I don't want to go too much into this because this is not a developer issue, but the big reason I haven't is that I don't see the advantage for the vast number of plugins. Some of the ones that I saw examples of are for like I think it was either the Lowe's or a Home Depot plugin.
Wolfram Alpha is the easy sided one where you want, you fear that the language model is not good at math, and so you just offload that to
Wolfram. So Wolfram Alpha is an example of a plugin that sort of makes sense to me. A Home Depot one does not make sense to me, because I might ask about fences and it will say, sure, here some examples of fences, and it'll provide links to the Home Depot website. What am I getting from this? So plugins, and the other catch to that, of course, is that in order to even have gotten Home Depot to reply at all, I had to have enabled the Home Depot plugin.
Yes.
And you're limited to the number of plugins that will run at once.
Right. And so pause on that thought for a second. So the reason why I brought this up is for 2 reasons. One, you'll find that the plugins themselves are not guaranteed. They're very inconsistent when they work and when they don't. Some implementations naturally are better than others, and so you run into that same problem. But another one, since you, like me, sort of kick the tires of Google Assistant and Actions as well, very early on in the rollout of Google Home, when you were, as a developer, asked to build on top of that, if you recall, we had a similar problem
Yeah.
with discovery of tools. You
Yep.
literally had to just have a mental model that I want to talk to Sesame Street, okay? But what the actual usability flow is, I want to read a bedtime story to my kids,
Right.
right? And there's no action that is that specifically detailed. Now, there's some intelligence to say, oh, well, person, bedtime story, makes an inference that that's a book for a person under 10, maybe. Hopefully, Alan, you're not getting bedtime stories read to you. So there's a way to do a rule-based sort of wrapper around that to sort of get to that, or use a large language model to solve that problem. But again,
Well,
being that we're now working in a non-deterministic world, that is not guaranteed
the
either. So
problem
I was
with
just trying to draw the parallels between the
right,
two.
right. The issue with the large language model to do that, though, is that at least in the most common way to handle this is to then put essentially everything into the prompt.
Yeah.
So you will say things like, you have the following 100,000 actions available, and here's what they do. And 100,000 actions won't fit into a prompt. And I feel like that's kind of some of the challenge that plugins have, is you can't say, we're going to insert every single bit of plugin information
Right.
into the prompt in the off event that, the off chance that you're going to say something that will be useful to one of them. Right. So I feel like it's a clever idea, but it's a bit of a disconnect. And how that relates to this is that as developers, we can say exactly which functions get defined in each call.
Exactly.
And this now ties into what you hinted at before, where I was going to go to.
Right.
And that is that there is an interesting parallel between these functions and what in the previous conversational design world we called intents.
Right.
And how with Alexa and what we used to have with actions on Google were these tools that let us build intents, set what, or train the model with a bunch of sample phrases that would lead, that would trigger each intent, and specify different slots or entities for each of these intents, and how they would then be handed off to some back-end code that would deal with them. And that's kind of parallel to, these functions and what parameters the functions can take. What's interesting to me is that the intent model has evolved over the past 5 or 10 years. So it's no longer, you're going to have a bunch of intents, you're going to have a bunch of training phrases for those intents.
Right.
It's now, sometimes some intents will be active and sometimes they won't. You have state machines almost that are managing it. You've got, just basic form filling, which doesn't necessarily trigger an intent until all of the slots have been filled for that form. So I've got real questions about, we can duplicate some of that as developers with functions, the state machine part in particular. I manage a state machine and I only surface certain functions at different times in that state machine. But I don't know, for example, if slot filling is enabled yet. So, for example, one of the examples that they like to give for function calling is a hypothetical get current weather function.
Correct. Yeah.
And this get current weather function takes two properties. It takes a location, which is they define as a string, but okay, whatever. And units, whether, Celsius or Fahrenheit. So I kind of wonder if, as part of the conversation loop, if I say something like, I'd like the current weather, is it going to prompt me for a location? And I say New York City. And it says, well, okay, I now have, as part of my entire conversation, that they have asked for the weather and they've given this location. Therefore, I can now tell you this is the function call. Or if I, as a developer, need to manage that by hand.
Right.
And I don't know. And I haven't seen anybody talking about this yet.
So have we actually seen, and I haven't been to their GitHub note in a few weeks, have we actually seen the implementation example of that weather example? Because they only gave a handful of examples, like one or two.
They gave an implementation example in their documentation. They have, and it's the weather one that they have. And
Okay.
they've kind of mocked up the actual function call part, so that it returns constant information for, it's always 72 and sunny.
Right.
Wherever you are. But
well, did it, because I remember, and I don't have it in front of me, but there was like a pipe, Celsius versus Fahrenheit, and
right.
I was skimming through this, and I thought, oh, the thing is intelligently going to pick Celsius if I pick Brussels, or
right, and it's not clear where that, again, that gets back to how is the large language model picking that parameter unless you specify it. Or, or will it prompt for it? Or will it make an intelligent guess based on location? Or I don't know. These are things that nobody's talking about.
Right. And you know why, right? That's at least my assumption.
I have my guess, but
all right, please go.
My guess is that no, it doesn't do that. It's not going to, it's not going to prompt for anything. No. That's going to be up to us as developers to prompt for. That's my guess.
Spot on. It's also, albeit we don't know yet how potentially useful or powerful their implementation of functions in this new sort of Gen AI sort of paradigm is, I don't see compelling use cases. I mean, I can see ways to cut out LangChain.
That's funny because LangChain has bought into this wholeheartedly.
Oh, well, of course they would. Because, LangChain is pretty much synonymous with large language models, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. It definitely doesn't have the smarts to, proactively ask for clarifications, right?
Well, I don't know, because
unless you build that functionality in.
Right. Well, but again, I don't know because I haven't fully tried this out yet, and I haven't seen anybody else trying it out and demonstrating it. So I guess that goes on the list of things that we need to play with.
Kick the tires about, yeah.
Yeah. I do know LangChain. I've seen discussion about how people are using it in LangChain, and some of them are brilliant approaches. I think one of my favorite approaches that I've seen, and I heard it, I didn't look at the sample code, I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around it still. But one of the big problems that we have, for example, with SQL injection and with prompt injection, is that if you, under the old way of doing things, you could say, generate an SQL query that does this, and it will generate a single SQL query, filling in the values in various places.
Right.
Which is fine unless the person has somehow convinced it to, for one of those values, done an SQL injection attack.
Right.
Which is totally possible. So instead, what this person has, the prompt that the person came up with and the function the person came up with is, you'll provide an SQL query where all the parameters will be separate parameters, is an array of separate parameters. So you then use the native SQL, whatever SQL library you're using, has a way to avoid SQL injection by replacing the parameters in a safe and sane way. And this now eliminates a whole class of SQL injection problems. And I saw that
you've done a bit. You've actually given a presentation recently.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that another time.
Okay.
But as part of my presentation, even I had this one line in it that said, "To do, validate this SQL query."
Right.
Because
yeah, that's on us, right?
Right, because but this now, being able to have the system break it up into into the SQL part and the data part that goes into that
Right.
SQL, that becomes one cleaner way, one safer way to do this. And you could even say things like, as part of your instructions, and there is a parameter that says whether this is a safe SQL call or whether it's a risky SQL call. And if it's risky, apply additional checks to it. You as a developer can now apply additional checks to it. So, I think it's those kinds of tools, enabling those kinds of tools, that I think are clever. Because one of the things that we used to, again, a month ago, is let's push everything to the LLM. Let's let the LLM do everything for us. And I think this is now saying, let's let the LLM do something, do what it's good at, and then hand it back to us to do what we're good at. And then we're going to take the results and hand it back to the LLM to do what it's good at again. And maybe we'll talk about that. Let's talk about that for next week.
Yeah. Well, I've got a question for you on this, though. Not to derail this conversation, but the way you just explained it, would that function call functionality be considered a form of few shot prompting?
Oh, that's interesting.
Where you're essentially constraining it is in the same way, and you're providing it with examples.
I guess it is. That's a good point. I guess basically giving it the possible functions that can be called is few shot training. That's a really good point.
Abstract it versus what you just said, where a few weeks ago it was almost zero shot in the way that a developer would approach this, which is just let the LLM do it.
Well, but as a developer, even then we needed to. Well, you're right. No, you're right. You're right. Because when we would do SQL queries, frequently we would say things like, "Give me an SQL query with this schema."
Boom. Yep.
Now we're saying, "Give me, call this.
Give me an SQL query, but you have to
return it in this function as a function."
Yeah.
And I think one of the impressions I got from this webinar about discussing functions in LangChain was how people are more and more thinking of it in terms of, this is a new way to structure the output.
Right. That's what I hear.
Because as structured output, I'm feeding it into a function, sure. But the important bit is now it's structuring the output.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think it's powerful. I think that's really useful.
Oh, yeah. And then you feed that back into whatever you need to do back to your front end or your client side, and just have it run through the thing again and say, all right, in English, this is what you need.
Right. So I'm really curious to see how people are using functions. Because these are, I think, some clever ways. I know I've got 500 million ideas on what to do with it that I'm looking to play with, and I'm looking to see other LLMs start tuning their models to do similar stuff.
Right.
So whether they implement it exactly the same way, I don't really care. But I'm really interested in seeing that kind of a model. So I'm curious to see what other folks are doing with it. You can always get a hold of me on Twitter or LinkedIn. What are the best places to find you, Noble?
Gosh, LinkedIn is primarily it nowadays. I'm on Twitter just passively, but you can find me there at Noble Ackerson. I'm on Blue Sky, same same deal. I'm not really big into social media these days, but if you send me a message, I'll definitely see it.
And so we would love to hear from you, love to hear your thoughts, your questions. And hopefully I can convince Noble to come back another time to join us on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Thanks for joining, Noble.
Glad to be here again. I could nerd out with you with this kind of stuff for an hour if you let me.
Ages and ages.